Liverpool, Chelsea decimated Port Vale, Arsenal shockingly left the FA Cup, and of course, West Ham lost on penalties to Leeds. Here's your full FA Cup recap. All right, people, it's time for us to just quickly take a look at the games that were played in the FA Cup over this weekend. After the long-standing international break, it was time for teams to return to club football with no more disruptions from now to the end of the season. We all know at Arsenal, a couple of players didn't go to represent their nations, while some did in very important World Cup qualifiers, like Vitor Gyökeres, who led Sweden to a win over Ukraine in the semis, and of course Poland in the finals. However, there was heartbreak for the likes of Riccardo Calafiori, who was part of the Italian side that actually got the final berth after beating Northern Ireland, but they lost some penalties to Bosnia. Same with Christian Nogard, who faced the same penalty fate when they played against Czech Republic. Penalty shootouts can be very painful if your team loses, and of course that happened to them. So with that out of the way, we had to go into the FA Cup. There were 4 fixtures that were set. Man City were to lock horns against Liverpool. Chelsea were to play against Port Vale. Arsenal was to visit Southampton. And of course, the last Premier League encounter was between West Ham and Leeds. Starting with the first clash, this was one that we didn't see coming. Man City playing against Liverpool. It was interesting, Looking at the lineups, it was evident that both teams wanted to go for it. I think I can just quickly run through the lineups of both teams. Yeah, so Man City had James Trafford in goal. Matheus Nunes was on the right back slot. Nico O'Reilly on the left, with Kushanov and Guehi in the middle. And of course, they had Rodri and Bernardo Silva in defensive midfield. Semenyo on the right-hand side, Doku on the left, Ryan Cherky played behind Erling Haaland. As for Liverpool, and the slot played that his unorthodox 4-4-2 setup, where he had Salah and Ekitike lead the line. Florian Wirtz and Dominic Szoboszlai were on the flanks. Curtis Jones and Gravenberch were in the middle, while Kerkez played on the left-hand side, Gomez on the right. Alisson and Konate were in the middle with Mamadashvili in goal. Obviously, there were a couple of injuries to contend with. Alisson was injured in the game. I think he was injured a couple of months back and he's not going to be available for selection for quite a while. But the game itself saw Man City smashed Liverpool. The first goal came from Erling Haaland. This is someone that has really found goals hard to come by in recent weeks. Basically, the world was out for him, speaking of how he hasn't been as consistent as he's been in recent years. But this one was a whitewash. The first goal, good build-up play, led to a penalty. That penalty was somewhat debatable, if I'm being honest. But VAR did their checks, and for some reason, they deemed it to be a penalty. And of course, Haaland wasted no time, sending Mamadashvili the wrong way. That made it 1-0. Liverpool continued to attack. Ekitike had a couple of chances. But, sometimes his inconsistency comes into the fore. And he was, actually missing a couple. And then Haaland scored the second. It was a lovely ball. I think he was from Semenyo, if I remember, yeah. Good pass from Semenyo, and he finished it up. Semenyo then turned from provider to scorer when Ryan Cherky sent him up from the center. And with Mamadashvili rushing on him, he just chipped him. So the final goal was Haaland. Nico O'Reilly moved with the ball on the left-hand side, did a brilliant cutback, and Haaland smashed it. This was a hat-trick. Why since he scored a hat-trick in English football. But as we know, this is a very dangerous player. I think the last hat-trick he scored, when was that? It was for Norway against Israel, where he scored 3, and of course he scored 5 against Moldova. But for Man City, you have to go all the way back to know when he scored a hat-trick for them. But Man City is just one team that typically does very well in the spring, but they had some rough patches of form, drawing to Nottingham Forest, drawing to West Ham before, of course, losing to Real Madrid. They lost on both legs, 3 like Benebao, and of course 1-2 at the Etihad, but we can attribute the red card to Bernardo Silva in that game they lost at the Etihad. However, Man City smashed Liverpool up and rightly booked their place in the FA Cup semi-finals. This is a team that are perennial winners. I think in 19 available trophies, Pep has won like 10 or some story like that. They dictated the game, possession, tempo. What can you talk about? Liverpool could not contend with them. I even forgot to mention that in the game there was even a penalty for Liverpool, but unfortunately Mo Salah missed his effort, and that was a good save from Trafford. So at the end of this clash, it was Man City 4, Liverpool nil. Going to the next one, this was quite routine. Port Vale, their adventure in the FA Cup is finally over. They started their campaign early up with the win over Malden and Tiptree. In the next round, they played Bristol Rovers and won them 1-0. The next round, they played Fleetwood Town and beat them 1-0. Then, of course, they played Bristol City and beat them 1-0 before playing Sunderland and defeating Sunderland 1-0. Then they now played Fulham and defeated Fulham 1-0 as well. So their journey had been interesting in the FA Cup, but when they played Chelsea, oh my days, it was a massacre. Going into this Chelsea game, they were in poor form. They had lost like 5 of their last 7. They lost to Bradford in the league, lost to Blackpool, lost to Doncaster, lost to Wycombe Wanderers. But the Chelsea game was just horrible to watch from a positive perspective. Jorel Hato scored the first goal for Chelsea. It was followed by João Pedro. Then Gabriel scored an own goal. Then Tosin scored one more to make it 4. Then Andre Santos scored, Esteval, and Garnacho rounded it up. So Chelsea did very well to smash Port Vale and rightfully gain themselves a place in the semi-finals of the FA Cup. And this was really required from Chelsea because they were in a rut on their own. They had lost their last 4 games, 5-2 to PSG, 1-0 at home loss to Newcastle, and that 3-0 loss to PSG and a 3-0 loss to Everton. So it was very evident that Chelsea were really struggling, and this was a game that they needed to win to get some form, and they got that. So with Chelsea winning Port Vale by 7-0, they earned themselves a place in the semis. And of course, the Arsenal versus Southampton game. This was just quite terrible. I did the match reaction last night. Was very pissed off with the way Arsenal played. They had more possession, had more shots. But in the end, if you don't take your chances, you will lose. Southampton had 8 shots with 4 on target, but 2 were on goal. While Arsenal had 23 shots with 7 on target, and only 1 was on goal, the one from Victor Gyökeres. Many players will not cover themselves in glory in this game. Gabriel Jesus was terrible. Kai Havertz did okay to a certain degree. Ben White, that was a schoolboy error for someone of his professionalism and experience. To think that the best player on the pitch was that Max Darman from a national perspective is an indictment on the senior players. But just go to show how much of a talent that boy is, and I'm really hoping that in the running he will get more games. Arsenal really messed up, had a couple of chances that the keeper Daniel Perez made to make a couple of good saves. But in the end, goals from Ross Stewart and Shea Charles put Southampton in the FA Cup semi-finals. As you'd expect, that was barraged with a lot of questions regarding the performance of the lads. And he gave credit to Southampton where it was due, saying that they did well enough to get the victory, while our own lads were terrible defensively. And of course, we couldn't take our chances offensively. But to add insult to injury, we also lost Gabriel to injury in the game. He actually signaled that he wanted to leave the pitch, but he was feeling something on his knee. And typically, when that happens, it's never good. And we have a game against Sporting CP on Tuesday night. Obviously, there'll be a watch along for that. But just hope that the lads will do enough, to take up this rut, because we cannot be in this form of form towards the end of the campaign. Initially, Arsenal was going for the quad, but of course, they lost to Man City in the Carabao Cup final 2 weeks after we had international break. Now I've lost to Southampton, which was quite disappointing. So we have the Champions League to contend with on Tuesday against Sporting CP. If we manage to win that clash, we're going to play the winner between Atletico and Barcelona. Because Atletico and Barcelona is going to be a very tough quarterfinal clash as well. But let's not look ahead of ourselves. We're looking ahead of ourselves in this FA Cup, taking to play other Man City or Chelsea, only to be knocked out by Southampton. So I'm really hoping that doesn't happen again as well. Then the final game was quite interesting. That happened this evening between West Ham and Leeds United. West Ham actually started a very strong squad. Ariola in goal, Walker Peters and Diouf as the fullbacks, Disasi and Kilman in the defense, Magasa and Potts on defensive midfielders, Traore, Bowen and Fernandez in midfield with Tati Castellanos as the attacker. As for Leeds, Luca Perry came back in goal, Rodon, Bijol and Stroik were the defenders, James Justin and Jaden Bogu provided some width from the wing-back positions, while Ethan Ampadu and Ao Tanaka were the holding midfielders. Noah Okafor and Stack played behind Mecha. Leeds actually scored 2 goals first. The first goal came from Ao Tanaka, lovely effort. And of course, DCL, who came on as a sub for Frankie Mecha, scored a penalty. But when the game was about to finish in the 90th and the 93rd minute and 96th minute, there were goals from Fernandez and Disasi. We took the game into extra time. Going into extra time, Tati Castellanos actually scored, but VAR cancelled it. And that's saying your bad luck is happening. Then later on, Ariola got injured and was replaced by Finlay Herrick. Herrick was making his debut for West Ham in such circumstances. Then for the shootout, Joe Pirro played the first one, missed. West Ham captain Jarrod Boyle played the zone and missed. Then DCL played the zone and scored. Kyle Capita scored his. Brendan Aronson scored to make it 2-1. Tomas Suchek scored this to make it 2-2. Then Wilfred Gnonto scored it to make it 3-2. And of course, Pablo missed his to make it 2-3. So that meant that if Pascal Stroik scored the final goal, he was going to take Leeds to the semifinals. And of course, he did that. And Leeds have progressed. And as you would expect, the draws are already out, with Chelsea playing Leeds and Man City playing Southampton. So looking at these draws, it clearly means that the final would potentially be Chelsea versus Man City, which is actually a good thing for both sides, I guess. Which means that if we had won Southampton, potentially we would have played Man City in the semis. But we're out, so there's no point bothering over this. It's already very evident that, we have to focus on other endeavors. So that basically brings me to the end of today's recap. I was just going to talk about the 4 games that I played in the FA Cup. We're out of it. But going into the week, tomorrow there will be a match preview for the Bayer Leverkusen game. And of course, the watch along. And that will be followed with, the build up to Bournemouth. Obviously, we are just have only 2 titles left to contend with. And we have to do our best to ensure that we make those ones. So that's pretty much it. Come on, you guys.